Since Trump entered politics, he's attacked immigrants, Muslims, Haitians, Democrats, basically anyone who isn't 100% down with MAGA. But there is one group he seems to despise above all: journalists. Not the TV personalities, podcast hosts, or propagandists who cheer him on. He loves them. What he hates are journalists who hold those in power, like him, to account. After all, it was journalists who uncovered his illegal schemes over decades. They helped expose assault allegations against him over the years. And in just the past week, it was real journalism that helped derail one of his most important cabinet picks, Matt Gaetz, for Attorney General. We've heard him attack the press for years. That's not new. You've heard historians warn of how attacks like these are out of the dictator playbook. Take a listen.
It's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write, and people should look into it.
You take the writer, because you're never going to find it. They're going through phone records. It's been a long time. You take the writer and or the publisher of the paper, a certain paper, and you say, who is the leaker? National Security. And they say, we're not going to tell you. They say, it's okay, you're going to jail. And when this person realizes that he is going to be the bride of another prisoner very shortly, he will say, I'd very much like to tell you exactly who that leaker is. It was Bill Jones.
They're the enemy of the people. They are. They're the enemy of the... I've been asked not to say it. I don't want to say it. They're the enemy of the people. And someday they're not going to be the enemy of the people, I hope.
Now, Trump knows he can't sway real reporters, the ones, with integrity who take their jobs seriously. So he's finding workarounds. He has cozied up to far-right media personalities like Tucker Carlson, Laura Loomer, and Nick Fuentes, the types who will parrot his agenda, no questions asked. And then this year, he went further, aligning himself with Elon Musk and giving the billionaire unprecedented access to his incoming administration. Now he's moving to get ahead of the game in the legal sense. You see, Trump's not happy about a piece of legislation called the Protect Reporters from Exploitative Spying Act, or the Press Act. On Wednesday, Trump said on Truth Social, Republicans must kill the bill. His post came after Jody Ginsburg, the CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists, had this to say.
We know that Trump is interested in going after whistleblowers, people who leak, and it's absolutely essential that they are protected and that journalist sources are protected and that journalists are allowed to do their job.
The Press Act, of course, is all about filling in a major gap in protecting journalists. It would block the FBI and other agencies from using subpoenas to figure out who leaked information by going after reporters, their internet providers, or even any services they may have used. Basically, it would help journalists protect their sources without the fear of being thrown in jail for simply doing their job. This bipartisan bill already passed the House unanimously this year. Many of Trump's allies in Congress support the bill, and at one point, even Tucker Carlson actually endorsed it in an interview. This was one of a few things many Republicans and Democrats were on the same page about: protecting the First Amendment and stopping government overreach when it came to journalism. In the past, press advocates have slammed presidents from both parties for crossing the boundaries between government and the press. Take, for example, when the Bush administration sent a reporter to jail for not giving up the name of a source, or when the Obama administration obtained 2 months' worth of phone records from journalists at the Associated Press. Trump's outburst Wednesday may have trashed all the bipartisan work done to prevent this kind of overreach, even though the House-backed Press Act is now looking unlikely to make it through the Senate before the session ends. It only takes one senator wasting time on the floor to push this off until next year, when we know what happens. Republicans take control of Congress. With so many Republicans scrambling to prove their loyalty to Donald Trump, it is worth pausing to think about where America is heading and what message this sends to the world, especially when Trump takes cues on how to treat the press from dictators like Vladimir Putin or Viktor Orban and Benjamin Netanyahu. This year, the U.S. ranked 10 spots lower in press freedom than it did in 2023, according to Reporters Without Borders. And just today, Israel, a major U.S. ally that receives billions of dollars in American tax-paid money, sanctioned one of its largest and longest-running newspapers, Haaretz, because the government simply did not like its reporting. Trump's doubling down on media attacks, suing outlets for billions just for doing their jobs, shows how he has refined his tactics since his last term. His pushback on this bill is likely just the beginning. Joining me now is Jody Ginsburg, CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jody, it's great to have you back on the show. Trump singled out your PBS NewsHour interview last week when he demanded Republicans kill this bill. How important is this bill for the safety of journalists, and how concerning are Trump's reactions to all of this?
It's really important. There's no federal level shield law. So 49 states in America have some kind of protection for journalists and their sources to protect those sources so that we have access to information in the public interest. You think about public interest stories like Flint, Michigan, the water in Flint, Michigan, and the toxins in there. You think about stories about individuals like the Republican senators and the Democratic senators that have been exposed as corrupt by reporters. All of that is essential that we protect them. So it was a little surprising to hear Donald Trump's reaction to my comments on Monday, because this has had bipartisan support. This isn't a partisan bill. This has had bipartisan support from the beginning. It just needs to pass the Senate, but now it looks like it won't, and without it, we may see many more actions, many more journalists subpoenaed to give information about their exposés into all sorts of wrongdoing and corruption at all kinds of levels.
I mentioned that Reporters Without Borders lowered the U.S.'s press freedom ranking. What has been the state of journalism like here for the last few years? I mean, give us the overview. We've seen journalists get arrested during Black Lives Matter protests, protests against Israel's war on Gaza, and so on. But from your vantage point, from where you sit, what is the trend that you have been seeing?
So we've seen a decline on all fronts. We've seen a 50% increase in assaults on journalists. We've seen a huge spike in online harassment of journalists. And remember, that normally affects women, most specifically, those from minority communities. We're seeing an increase in the number of legal threats against journalists, again, at all sorts of levels. And what's really important to remember about this is this isn't about the mainstream media, as Trump likes to call them. This isn't about the big names, the CNNs, the New York Times, the Washington Post. The people that this hit hardest are the small local newspapers that do not have the resources to fight back against spurious legal threats brought by local officials, for example. And that's where most people get their news and their information. It's the information that has most bearing on people's ordinary lives.
Say that Trump succeeds in getting his party to kill this legislation. How can journalists protect themselves from an administration that has called them the enemy from within? What does the next 4 years of journalism look like, in your opinion?
I think the next 4 years looks like one in which we expect journalists to have to significantly increase their resources to protect themselves against legal threats. We're seeing a number invest more significantly in digital security, physical security, certainly starting to build funds to fight these kinds of subpoenas, the kinds of potential libel and defamation threats that we know are likely to come. We've already seen those threatened from Trump, and we're likely to see more, not just from him, but from administrations across the country, local administrations. So I think it's one in which we can expect journalists to be fighting on many more fronts to be able to provide the kinds of information that is essential for all of us to live our everyday lives. And at the same time, we can expect a continued flood of mis and disinformation that tries to make the space one in which it's very difficult for people to understand what they should trust, who they should trust, what trustworthy information even looks like.
Let me ask you about another important development overseas, and this is, of course, dealing with Israel sanctioning Haaretz, one of the leading and oldest newspapers in that country. Israel has also killed dozens of journalists in Gaza, detaining Palestinian journalists, censoring critics of the war. You advocate against actions like these and dedicated your career to it. But as you know, Netanyahu is happy about Trump's win, with both soon in power at the same time. Just give me your reaction to what you see happening in that country with the developments today in Israel.
Well, this is the latest in what has been systematic attempt to censor the media, and information coming out of Gaza and information from Palestinian journalists and now increasingly from journalists in Israel. And it's part of a pattern. It's part of a pattern of journalists being killed, journalists being arrested, media infrastructure being targeted, and of course, foreign media banned. As we've seen, Al Jazeera was banned from Israel. Its premises were raided in the West Bank. And now we're seeing sanctions against Haaretz, which is one of the few papers, the few news outlets in Israel that has been reporting independently and with great clarity on what's happening inside Gaza.
All right, Jody Ginsburg from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Jody, thank you so much for joining us and the work that your organization is doing. Certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.